For those of you who read my Bitcoin magazine article, I talked about this parabolic curve that we've been in. And if you're looking at the 3-day candles here, um, and I'm not the only one that's been talking about this. So previously, I was discussing something like this, where we're in this linear ascent. Keep in mind, this is still log scale. But we're on this linear path, and we're approaching the top of it. But it was something like that. So I'll draw the linear path for you guys. It was like, if you go from here and go straight down, you see this nice linear trend on Bitcoin. But it's kind of coming to a head now. You can see that it's like poking through the top a little bit. Depending on what exchanges you're looking at, it's already penetrated it. And then if you go on the bottom, you see the same thing here. Basically something like that. Which puts us in a precarious situation. Everyone smash that like button now. Yeah, so this puts us in a precarious situation here because we have two trends that we're testing right now. If you're looking at Bitstamp, it's like kind of testing it right now. But if you're looking at Bitfinex, it's not quite there. It's in this weird area because keep in mind these are 3-day candles. So even though it looks like it's testing it right here, if we zoom in on like the 120-minute candles, I don't think it quite has us there yet. So if we look here on the 120-minute candles, it's like testing it as we speak. And since it's such a long trend, keep in mind that like this isn't a hard limit. This is more of a zone. So like anything above and below is going to be considered this line because it just really depends on how you draw the line, right? So if we keep in mind this 3-day trend and we zoom out, we see that parabolic trends aren't terribly unfamiliar to Bitcoin, right? So we can actually sketch this out a couple different times throughout its history. If we look at this curve right here, we see that it kind of abided by this parabolic curve here in terms of its path back down to the bottom. Slight parabolic curve here, something like that. And we see it on the lower support. Oops, that's not what I want. And then we see it on the support as well. So we see like this nice continuation of this parabolic trend here. That if you drew it up here, yeah, you see these outliers here, but for the most part, the meat of the trend is pretty well contained within this you can call it a parabolic envelope, or parabolic trend line, whatever you want to call it. But it's been really nicely contained within that trend line there. So you see that Bitcoin kind of goes to these phases of parabolic rises and demises, right? Not demises, that sounds a little pessimistic, but you can see it. And then if we go on the 1-day here and zoom over, let's just go through a brief history of parabolic curves with Bitcoin so we can understand what we might be up against in the future. So once again, we see a parabolic growth curve. This one's a little bit more aggressive, probably better off right there. So this is this is another one that had a parabolic envelope here before it ultimately broke down. And you see the support and resistance is very well confined within this little envelope here, right? And then we can do this again here as well. This one's a little bit more aggressive too, but it's parabolic nonetheless. It goes like this. Probably better off to draw it like right here and go here. So you see that, if we zoom out, Bitcoin does this sort of thing where it goes like parabolic and then it kind of tapers down and then it goes parabolic. So let me draw one more envelope here. So it goes down, So one thing we can take away from this is that as we see the decline is not as aggressive as the entrance into the envelope here. This one doesn't really have a well-confined lower boundary here. And we can do this over and over again throughout its history. Even here, even when it's like in the dollar values here. Oops. So let's go ahead and draw all these out so we can just look at them all and get a good historical view of Bitcoin over the years. Something like that. Oops, let's go here. Go here. You know, these are rough fits, but they're parabolic nonetheless. So it's important to keep in mind that, like, not only is this parabolic, it's parabolic on a log scale. So let's go ahead and zoom out here. And let's look at the history of this, okay? So we can see historically, let's go ahead and zoom in here. So let's call this parabola 1. Let's call this P1. We got P1 here, right? So parabola 1, we said it had a very exponential growth, went damn near vertical, and then it broke, and then it kind of went like sideways before finding a bottom here, right? And then parabola 2, we'll call this parabola 2 here. Same sort of story. So it rises, it goes damn near vertical, can't quite keep up the momentum, it pulls back, and then it goes slightly sideways before picking up a new trend again. We'll call this parabola 3 here. So parabola 3, it goes vertical, can't quite keep up the growth, it pops, and then it goes a little bit sideways, and then it finds another parabolic decline, which puts us in our current parabola, which we'll call parabola 4 here. And this is the big daddy parabola, which would be parabola 4, right? So we see, just based off of the previous trends, if we zoom out and put them into perspective here, let's pull this right here. And let's actually get rid of these guys. So we'll get rid of you and get rid of you. So we see that this happens over and over again throughout the life of this, which is great if you're an investor, because you see an asset with a repeatable pattern. It's going to be a tradable event, right? So we see, it goes up and oops, it pops and goes a little bit sideways. It goes up, it pops, goes a little bit sideways, goes up, it pops, goes a little bit sideways, and now we entered this nice accumulation zone, which has sent us into our current parabola, right? And it's been a very aggressive parabola, but I don't think it has much more growth in it. I think at most we'll see 10K, and that's at most. I expect it to top out right at the upper edge of this envelope right here. So this would have us at like 8 to 9K. So something like 8,000 to $9,000, somewhere in there. This is the absolute maximum I am anticipating seeing it going, because you see that it's abided by this parabolic envelope, and it has not deviated from this trend for 2 years. It has been in this trend for 2 years. Okay, so this is October of, wait, is that 2 years? Am I an idiot? Yeah, October of 2015 right here is when it first started, and now we're in November of 2017. So two-year long parabolic growth, and it's coming to a head because it's going, like I said before, damn near vertical on a log scale. So this is very aggressive price growth. So we can expect a pullback, and then a tapering down before the next accumulation zone. Okay. So let's see here. If we look at the retracements, the historical retracements, we can start to develop price target sets for these parabolic pops. If we look at, let's go through all of these so we can just have a nice background here. Oop, that's not what I want. Let's go to, where the hell is it? Oh, fib retracement. So we have the first one. We see it pop down to 78. It settled around 50. Let's leave you here. We see the second one goes up to here, pops down to 78, and it settles around 50 to 61 before continuing downward. Once more. This one not as aggressive, but again, it settled around 50, and then it continued downward. And now that puts us right here in the position we're in now, where if we call this the bottom of the parabola, and let's say it does go to 8K, let's say it actually does reach the upper boundary here, something like that, we can expect a pullback. It seems aggressive price-wise because, we're seeing these crazy numbers, right? We're seeing, it's up at 7,800, 7,200 currently, 7,270, and people are seeing these numeric growths. But what they're not taking into account is that, like, as we're growing in price, the actual percentage growth is slowing down. And so that's what makes these parabolas so aggressive in terms of price correction, because it becomes, as the slope of this parabola increases, right, the upper and lower bound increase, the slope increases, this puts very harsh requirements on the trend to maintain this percentage growth, right? And so eventually the market, no market is sustainably going to go vertical, but we can expect that when this does correct, wherever this upper price limit is, that we can see a pullback to 61, and most likely we'll see a pullback to tagging the 61, coming back to the 50, pinging around here before continuing a nice gradual resumption of downtrend, and then a new accumulation phase, right? So this is just the parabolic envelope that we're talking about here, right? And keep in mind that this is, again, I can't stress this enough, that this has been a 2-year-long trend. So a test of this lower parabola is going to really send a message to investors and traders that, like, if they see a deviation of this parabola, right, this will be the first time it's broken this trend in 2 years, right? I find it very unlikely that a puncturing of this parabola I find it very unlikely that a move below this bottom support curve, this guy right here, would not result in what has historically been a 50 to 61% correction, and then a resumption of a downtrend before an accumulation phase is come into play here. And we've seen it just happen. Again, seen it happen over and over again throughout the life of Bitcoin. So it only makes sense that it would happen again. That doesn't, I think a lot of people have this misconception about what a correction actually is. And a lot of people think that, like, just because you're having a correction, and that means that, oh, crypto's dead, Bitcoin's dead. And no, like, Bitcoin wants these corrections. And as an investor, if you can time these corrections, this can be very profitable. So as parabolic curves are seen throughout the market, just because it pops this parabolic curve doesn't mean that it's going to zero. It doesn't mean that crypto's dead. It just means that crypto is starting, or Bitcoin, I'm calling Bitcoin equal to crypto because it's like, that's the market index of crypto, right? For the most part, it has the highest market cap. But as Bitcoin goes through these phases, this is actually a good sign, in my opinion, that it's starting to behave like a predictable asset, and it's starting to behave like an asset that institutional investors want to see. And so this brings new money onto the playing field. And so during the next accumulation phase, we can expect this thing to go, we can make some market calls based on fib extensions here, but we can expect to see a pretty sizable hike on the next price growth. If we go through the next accumulation phase post parabola, we can expect this thing to go up to, let's see what the fib extension's like. So fib extension from here to here. What is this? This is a 420% fib extension. We see a fib extension here. We go down to here. That would have us at like 30K. That would have us at $30,000 per Bitcoin, right? And if we move this down to here, what did this do? Again, where's the 100? I'm losing it. There we go. We're seeing these crazy fib extensions, but we could see the next accumulation phase could push us to $30,000 to $40,000, maybe even $50,000 per Bitcoin. And that's not out of the question, considering, these large guys are starting to create, futures and options markets that are available to the layman, and it's just getting a large set of eyes onto Bitcoin, and it's very bullish. Just because we're setting up for a correction doesn't mean we're not bullish Bitcoin. Like long term, these are very bullish events. Like, don't get it twisted. Bitcoin, Schmitcoin. What makes you so sure that the 8 to 9K is okay? This is a great question. What makes you so sure that 8 to 9K is the top of the parabola? Why can't it touch it, pull back, and head vertical again? Okay, so let's go more in depth with this curve. Like, not even looking at other indicators. Let's just look at the history of price trend with Bitcoin here. So let's get some horizontal lines going here. Okay, so if we look at the history of Bitcoin, right, on this current price trend, so we see it makes these points all here, right? And we see the points right here, right? But they aren't random, okay? They have specific like checkpoints throughout the market where it says, okay, we're going to touch the top, we're going to go back down, we're going to reach a support level, and then we're going to continue upward. Okay, so if we look here, let's do a trend line. So let's just do a little thought experiment here. Okay, so every time we make a point on the upper curve of the banana, let's draw a horizontal line. Okay, and we'll just draw it to the curve, and we'll do this for every single one here. Okay, every single one. Okay, so what do we see here? We see, and then we'll just do a hypothetical one right here, right? And let's go ahead and extend this upward just a little bit, so we can just say, future growth. And we'll do the same thing here. Something like that. Okay? So if we look at the history of price trend with Bitcoin, we see that every time it's made a new top, the next top retraces to the previous top, right? So we see a new high here. Okay, boom, it goes down, and then this is really when the parabola really starts forming. Okay, so we see a new high here. Before this continues up to the next all-time high, it retraces down to this guy, right? Then it continues upward. Tests it again. Doesn't really matter. Okay, so then we see here, we see a new all-time high made here. It retests this. We see a new all-time high made here. It retests this. Okay. Then it comes up here again. It makes a new all-time high, tests the bottom of the parabola. It breaks through, makes a new all-time high, and it tests the bottom of the parabola and the trend line. Okay. Well, now we're in this situation right here where we're about to touch the upper boundary of the trend line, and we don't know what's going to happen. Historically, that means that it's going to come and retest this purple line. But unfortunately, in our case here, that has us well outside this parabolic curve. So you can imagine that, like, as the price continues to go upward and this correction trend is seen throughout the market, it's going to become harder and harder to maintain the trend while doing the corrections and the price growth trend as well. So what I think is going to happen is I think this is going to be our last high. It's going to come down, and as it goes to retest, this previous high, that's when it's going to start breaking down, is right in here. It's done this over and over again. Every time it makes a new high, it comes back down. Every time it makes a new high, it comes back down. I guess you could argue, okay, playing devil's advocate here, you could argue that it makes a new high, it comes back down to here, it goes up here, right? And it comes back down here. But that doesn't fit the profile of how Bitcoin has done its retracements. So if we take into account the retracement patterns that we've seen with every correction, right? So we go here, and we see a 50% retracement. Okay, let's do another one. Here to here, 50 to 61% retracement. We go from here to here. Okay, this is where I start to lose my confidence in its ability to ping off the bottom here, because Bitcoin loves to make 50 to 61%, somewhere in here, these little zones, 50 to 61% retracements. 50 to 61% retracement, and once more 50 to 61% retracement. Unfortunately, in our case, 50 to 61% lies outside the parabolic curve, right in here. So in order to maintain the previous trend of 50 to 61% retracements, it would have us outside the actual trend. So, you know, just playing the odds here, it just doesn't seem likely that it would bounce off, that it would actually correct and then come down to 50% retracement and then continue upward. It just doesn't seem likely because it hasn't historically done that. 3,000 never tested 1,300 though, a black swan event. Okay, 3,000 never tested 13. What? You're talking about this? Yeah, that's fine. It's more relevant to look at the retracement trend. You know, not necessarily the dollar value trend. This is just an added trend that we've noticed, but in general, the corrections always go to 50 to 61% every time. Okay, we can do this over and over again, right? So start here. You see a 50 to 61% retracement. Let's do this one. From here to here, we see a 50 to 61% retracement. And we can go from here to here. Again, 50 to 61% retracements. Every time it makes a new all-time high, it retraces 50 to 61% of the previous low. And that even works on, I mean, that's what we discussed at the beginning of the stream, right? That works on the macro scale. Like, that's, even these retracements were 50 to 61%. It's just what it's been doing, right? This view is starting to suck, isn't it? Anyway, I talked about it earlier in the stream. So that little trend that Bitcoin loves to do is why I don't have confidence in a resumption of an uptrend upon the next correction. It doesn't seem likely because that has us well outside the parabolic envelope, which historically over the last three parabolic envelopes we've seen has sent us into a sustained downtrend, which ultimately leads to an accumulation phase. Okay, so let's talk about some questions here. Do you see a shorter accumulation phase from historical charts, or accumulation getting longer? Honestly, guys, I don't like to think about market phases in terms of time. I like to think about them in terms of price objectives within the confines of a trend. So indirectly, I'm tracking time, but I'm really tracking price trend. So you can kind of imagine that, like, this little banana, as Josh was saying, this banana, right? We'll color it yellow. Color it yellow just for Josh. The banana in here, right? It's got a little stem. That I don't like to think about the time because that's not as relevant to me as the price objectives within a macro trend. I find that to be more useful for my trading. You know, personal preference, to each their own. But you can imagine that if you have a macro trend and you have price objectives within that macro trend, that inherently creates a time restriction on the price activity, right? It's like an indirect time association with the price growth. Do you think money will flow from Bitcoin to Ether during the correction, or Ether follows Bitcoin down? Okay, so we've got a few things people are talking about, right? So people want to know if this Bitcoin correction happens, what happens to the other coins, and what is the time frame we can expect? Okay, time frame, I don't really have an answer. I mean, you can, based on this parabolic trend, you can kind of guess that it would happen somewhere in between. Let's see. Let's make this 1 day so it's a little more precise. So you can imagine that if it's got this time restriction on it, that, you know, it's going to happen in the next 2 weeks. You know, like at most. Typically corrections are pretty fast, so I would imagine like 10 days, just based on, you know, if we do this right here. So we see here that there's like a 10-day. Again, I don't like to make time predictions, so I'm not really keen on doing this right now. So we can see that this width right here, oops. So we can see that this width is 10 days worth of price activity. These are 1-day candles. That, you know, I give it, like, I think it's gonna ping this upper line, and then ultimately come down. And so, you know, I'm pulling this completely out of my ass, guys. I don't think there's any way to reliably track days of predicted downtime, because, you know, it could be something like this, it could be something like this, you know, it could be something like this. Like, we don't know what a response to this upper trend line will be, so we don't know what that's going to be. So but I would say I would give it at most 10 days to reach this lower parabola, at most. I could be wrong, you know, it's entirely possible this thing could go here, it could consolidate, make a nice little bull pennant, and then go up here, and then everyone is happy and Charlie Lee cries, because Litecoin is not the supreme coin.